Hello and welcome. Welcome back, hopefully for some of you. Hopefully some of you are familiar with my tutorials and patterns and are here for the newest. So, this is a tutorial for the Stack-O pumpkins, which are a collection of 3 crocheted pumpkins that are then stuffed and built together in a stack of 3 ascending sizes. So what we will do is make our small pumpkin out of a pumpkin-y colored yarn that I have here, which will show you the general idea of how to construct the pumpkin crochet wise. All of them are made the same, the stitch count just changes a little bit. So we'll make the small one together and then you can make the medium and the large, and then we will assemble them together. So a few things that we need for our stack of pumpkins: obviously yarn. You can do all the same color, you can do 3 different colors, whatever strikes your fancy. I do recommend that for all 3 pumpkins you have a similar weight yarn. So this is a worsted weight yarn. So I'm using worsted weight, though it's different brands. I am using all worsted or medium weight yarn for my 3 pumpkins. If you were going to use chunky yarn, I would use chunky yarn for all 3 of them, even if it's 3 different kinds of chunky yarn. It just makes them stack a little bit more evenly, and the sizes don't get too out of proportion from one another. So, doesn't all have to be the same color. You can do 3 different colors. I think I did just say that. I'm doing 3 different colors. I'm doing shades of orange, so I'll have my lightest here, and then I have already stitched out my medium is a little bit darker orange, and then my large is, let's see if I can get this in over here. So we'll have small, medium, and large. So we'll go ahead and make that small one together. The things that you need for this pattern are a crochet hook that is 1.5 times smaller than 1.5 sizes smaller than the yarn calls for. So my yarn calls for a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. I am going to be using a 4 millimeter crochet hook for this, 1.5 millimeters smaller than the yarn calls for. You're also going to need scissors. You're going to need a yarn needle, a small one, and then it really does help to have, especially when you're putting all 3 pumpkins together, I don't know how you could do it without a long tapestry needle. I got my long tapestry needle, I think it's around 10 or 12 inches. From Amazon, it was a few dollars, $6 or $7, I think. And then for my orange pumpkins, I'm going to do twine to shape them and to tie them together, and maybe a little twine bow at the top around the stem. So the stem we're going to use a twig for, and I don't have that sitting here, but you will need something for a stem. You can use a wine cork, you could use a twig, you could use really any cinnamon stick. It could really be anything that you happen to have in the house that's easy, that's cheap. It doesn't need to be too crazy. I live in the woods, so twigs are very easy to come by. So let's go ahead and get cracking on this small pumpkin. I'm going to go ahead and clear my area here. Okay, so to get started with the small pumpkin, we are going to take our yarn and, again, a hook 1.5 millimeters smaller than the yarn calls for. This calls for a 5.5 millimeter hook, so I'm using a 4 millimeter hook. We're going to make a slip knot. The easiest way for me to do a slip knot is to wrap the yarn twice around my finger, and then I take the outside yarn and I put it over the inside yarn, and then I do that again, the new outside yarn over the inside, and then I grab the outside and pull it up through. That just happens to be the quickest way for me to knock out a slip knot. You can do it any way you choose. There's a bunch of different ways. Now we're going to chain 25. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, okay? Now using the back bumps, which are the little bumps on the back of your chain, those are the loops on the bottom, and then the back bumps are kind of on the top there. So we're going to use the back bumps. We're going to go on the second chain from the hook. So 1, 2 into that back bump, and we're going to do a slip stitch. So slip stitch in the second chain from the hook, slip stitch in the next stitch, back bump. Then we're going to do a single crochet in the next back bump. Now we're going to get into our half double crochets. So we're slowly thickening here as we go, and then we'll do a bunch of half double crochets, and then we're going to get thinner again as we get to the other end, so that when we cinch those ends together, there's not as wide of a fabric as there is in the center. So we're going to do 18 half double crochets all in the back bump straight across. So let's do 18 half double crochets together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Crocheting into the chain is my least favorite part, but at least it's a short chain. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That takes us to the end of our half double crochets. 18 half double crochets. So 2 slip stitches, single crochet, 18 half double crochets. Now we're going to go with a single crochet and 2 slip stitches to finish off. So that's your pattern. 2 slip stitches, 1 single crochet, 18 half double crochets, 1 single crochet, 2 slip stitches. Now, because that was our chain, we had no back loop to work into. Now we are going to start working in the back loop, and that's going to give us some pretty ridges that will give the pumpkin a little more pumpkin-y character. So let's go ahead and chain 1 and turn. Okay, now we're going to start in the stitch that we just made. Our last stitch is now our first stitch. It is a slip stitch. We are going to slip stitch in the back loop only. So we're leaving that front loop alone. We're only going into the back loop, and we're going to slip stitch through that back loop. Same thing with the next stitch. You've got both loops. We are going in only the back loop. Okay, and you'll get to see what this looks like in a minute. It gives it some nice texture. Now we're going to single crochet because we have 2 slip stitches, 1 single crochet, back loop only. From here on out, all of your stitches are back loop only. So back loop only, single crochet. Now we have our 18 half double crochets. Those are also going to be in the back loop only. So half double crochet, back loop only. There's 1 and 2, 3, 4. This row's a little bit easier. The chain is the tricky row. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, so there's our 18 half double crochets. Now we've got our single crochet, slip stitch, slip stitch. Remember, back loop only. Single crochet, back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only. Chain 1 and turn. So you can kind of see how we're starting to get that texture. On the side that we just did, you almost get like a ribbed line like you see going down the sides of pumpkins. So it really ends up looking very pumpkin-y in the end. So that is that. The way that we did our last row is how we're going to do every single one of these rows now. For 30 rows, the small pumpkin has 3 ribs and 5, yep, 30 rows. Sorry, had a little bit of a brain fart there. Okay, so we're going to do 30 rows just like that. So we'll do one more together, and then I will leave you to your 30 rows, and we'll catch back up when we're seaming it together. So remember, back loop only, always from here on out. Back loop slip stitch, back loop slip stitch, back loop single crochet, and then we've got our 18 half double crochets back loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. All right, there's our 18 half double crochets. So to finish it off, you know what you got to do. Single crochet, back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only, slip stitch, back loop only, chain 1 and turn. All right, we want 30 rows all together. We currently have 3, so we want 30 all together. Sometimes it's helpful to place stitch markers in that last turning chain, or you can count the ribs. Each rib is gonna signify 2 rows. They come together in a rib, so this 4th row that I'm getting ready to do will make another rib. So it's kind of easy way to remember where you're at. But 30 rows total, and I will see you back here after row 30. Okay, we are now done with our 30 rows, and you've probably got something that looks a bit like this. It'll probably it tends to curl one way, which actually ends up being the right side. So this is the side that we're going to expose, but first we have to seam it, and to do that we actually have to turn it inside out, because what we want to seam this, what we want is to have our working yarn, which is the yarn you just finished crocheting with, not the tail, but the working yarn you want on the bottom right. So you want it over here when you sandwich these together. Okay, so then we're going to cut a long tail, probably like, oh, I don't know, maybe a yard tail. Cut that, and we're going to thread on our short yarn needle. Okay. And now we're going to, whoops, I missed a step. Sorry about that. First, we have to pull our loop up through. So your loop that you just got done crocheting with, pull it all the way through so the yarn comes through that last stitch you just made. Now we'll go ahead and attach our yarn needle. There we go. Okay, so now on these two edges, you're going to be using both loops of each edge, okay? And we're going to do all 4 of those loops together. Now to line it up, you kind of have to stack them unevenly so that you can see all 4 loops. So then we're just going to go through the 2 loops on the top row and the 2 loops on the bottom row. Pull that through and move on to the next stitch. 2 loops on the top row, 2 loops on the bottom row. Again, top row, bottom row, just like that. We're pulling tight, but not tight enough to pucker. This method, going through both stitches when it's flipped, quote unquote, inside out, makes for an almost invisible seam. You really have to know what you're looking for to be able to identify it on the finished product. And we end up putting one of our yarns across the seam anyway when we're shaping the pumpkin into sections, so you really can't see it after that. That step you can do with yarn of the same color. You could do it with yarn of a different color. I'm going to use twine because I want this particular stack of pumpkins to look a little more rustic. I'm planning on giving this one to a friend who I think appreciates a little more rustic feel to her fall decor. We're slowly getting there. Your yarn will get pretty curly. You can see mine's kind of curling up right there, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. We're just going to carry on seaming this up. Like we've got 2 more left. It's always nice when you get to the end and have the same amount of stitches left on both sides. You know you started in the right place at the other end. It's no big deal if you don't. You can fudge it and make it work and it'll be just fine. All right, that's our last one. I always like putting 1 extra one in and knotting it so when we do the next step, this yarn isn't pulled to the point that it starts to pucker. Okay, so now we need to turn this inside out. And see, there is the seam, which looks very similar to all of the other rows when laid out. It's very hard to identify unless you really are looking for it. And then we're going to have a string over it anyway when we shape our pumpkin into 5 sections. So we've turned this inside out now. The next step is to cinch together this end that your working end is at. It is also the end where your tail is now. So you're just going to tuck the tail inside. We're going to go around. I like to grab 1 stitch at the end of every rib. So there's 1 at the end of this rib. And there's 1 at the end of this rib. And there's 1 at the end of this rib. So it technically ends up being every other row that you're grabbing. I find that that is sufficient to cinch it together. My yarn is getting really curly here. I find that that is sufficient to cinch it together, but it also doesn't make it impossible to cinch it together. If you grabbed every row, you'd have an awful lot of yarn that you were trying to cinch together into a tiny little opening. So doing every other, okay, we're back to the beginning, so I'm gonna grab that again. And now we're just going to carefully cinch up that hole without breaking your yarn. Be very careful. And then there's my hole right there. I'm going to take a couple passes on either side of it just to hold it closed. Okay, so there we go. Our bottom is cinched up nice and tight. Now let's stuff it. I'm going to try and do this on camera, but I don't have a lot of space here that I'm working with, so I might have to pull it off screen. And I like going from the inside out. I find that that gives me the roundest pumpkin. And I just kind of push it out, put more in the middle, push it out again. You want these nice and full, but not to the point where if you try and cinch this, you're not going to be able to do it because we need to close up this end next. So I think I'm looking pretty good here. It's pretty round. I think we're going to call that good. All right. So now you're stuffed. We've got to get this yarn to the other side because we need to cinch the other side now. So we're going to stick it right through the teeny tiny little opening that's left in the center of your original end. We're going to pull it through. We're going to attach it with a knot to one of the stitches on the top here. And now we're going to go around and we're going to do the same thing over again, grabbing one loop at the top of every rib. I don't know if you can hear my dogs in the video or not. I apologize. They're going crazy. There must be a squirrel in the yard or something like that. They should calm down in just a minute. Okay, we are back to the beginning here where we started. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to cinch that baby tight. And then we're going to run through a couple of times with our yarn to make sure that that stays nice and closed. Now, if you are going to use yarn to shape your pumpkin, you can just keep using your yarn tail, and you probably want to cut a little bit longer of a yarn tail if you're using the same yarn that you made the pumpkin out of. Because I'm using twine, I'm going to permanently fasten this yarn off and bury my end, and then I'm going to attach twine. So I'm going to go ahead and knot this a couple of times. And then I'm going to bury my end by running it through once in an odd spot and trimming it. So there we have a little unshaped pumpkin that we are ready to shape. All right, so now we are going to shape our pumpkin. So what I mean by that is, this is another example of the small pumpkin. I shaped it into 5 main ribs. And it just kind of gives it a fun pumpkin-y feel, and it squishes the middle together a little bit, much like an actual pumpkin is. This one I did with yarn, the same color. You can kind of see it in there. I did it with yarn the same color as the yarn that I used. I just used extra of this yarn because it was a nice tough yarn. Sometimes I did make a velvet pumpkin, turned out awesome, loved it. The yarn was absolutely not strong enough to do this part with it, so I had to find embroidery thread in the same color that was much stronger, and I was able to use it that way, but it still turned out great. So worked out in the end. So what we're going to do is, each one of these 5 sections has 3 ribs. So here are our ribs. 1, 2, 3. we would put a line there and pull in. 1, 2, 3, we'll put a line there and pull in. We're gonna make sure one of those lines goes on our seam, which you can see right there. So let's go ahead and get started with that. I'm gonna use twine on this one instead of the same yarn that I used to make it. The nice thing, if you use the same yarn, if you're able to use the same yarn that you use to make the pumpkin, there's no having to attach a separate lashing wire to it, which is kind of nice, but that is just fine. All right, so I am going to use my long 12-inch tapestry needle, which is overkill for this pumpkin, but for the large pumpkin, you can see the difference in size there. It really was a much better option for getting through and going around. So we're gonna make it work for this. So I'm going to thread my twine on my long 12-inch needle, and I'm going to get it tied on here by selecting a couple strands of yarn here, and then we're just gonna tie it on. Neither the bottom or the top of this pumpkin is going to be visible. The bottom is going to be sitting against the medium pumpkin, so you're not going to see the bottom, and the top is going to be covered by the stem, whether it's a tree branch or a cinnamon stick or a wine cork. Wine corks are super cute. It's going to be covered, so it really doesn't matter what that looks like. What does matter is making sure that when you insert your needle through, you're going through the middle and coming out the middle on the other side. So let's start with our seam row, which is right here. We're gonna take our twine and we're gonna place it over that row. Now, and I'm kind of holding it with my thumb there so that it doesn't move away from this row. Now I'm going to insert my needle in the center, and I'm going to try and come out as close to the center here as possible. And that's pretty close, if you can see. It's just about right in the middle. So now we're going to pull everything through. Okay. And so that's through there and it's coming out here, and now we're going to tighten it. Okay, see how that worked there? Now we're going to count because we put 3 ribs in each section. 1 rib, 2 rib, 3 rib. Here's our next line in between those 2 ribs. We're going to do the same thing. Tapestry needle in the center and hopefully out the center of the bottom. And we're going to pull again. Pull. Moving on. 1, 2, 3 ribs. We're going to put our yarn there. Hold it. Same thing. In through the middle. Out through... That's not quite the middle. That's the middle. Okay. And we're gonna pull. Okay, and then we're gonna count again. 1, 2, 3. Hold that there. Gotta let some of my yarn tail out. There we go. In through the middle. Out through the middle of the bottom. If your needle gets stuck, twist it. That usually helps free it. Okay, and we're gonna pull. And we've got one more. 1, 2, 3. Yarn over. That should leave 3 in the last section. 1, 2, 3. So yes, our count was right on the money. All right, we're done with the needle, so we're gonna pull. Well, we're not done with it, but we're done with it for the moment. Now, on the bottom, we are going to tie it to the tail. Okay, so that's our 5 little sections. So there's our little ribbed pumpkin. And then I'm going to trim these 2 ends the same length. I'm going to run my tapestry needle through one more time. Doesn't matter where it comes out this time because all we're doing is burying the tails. And sorry, I don't have a lot of space for this big long needle. Twist that to get them through. Come on. And then we'll just trim off the excess here. Okay, so there we go. There's our littlest pumpkin. So now we have little bigger, and a little bigger. We're gonna stack those babies right up. To stack them, you're gonna offset the ribbing. So what I mean by that is you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections. Your next pumpkin, you're gonna put a section here and a section here and here and here and here so that it offsets. And then the top pumpkin, you're gonna do the same with. And then you're gonna take, because I don't really have enough room to show you guys this, I'm sorry. You're going to take your long tapestry needle and you're going to run it down through the center of all 3 pumpkins. And you're going to pull it through and then you're gonna run it back up through the center of all 3 pumpkins and you're going to tie it. And that is going to attach all 3 pumpkins together. And then you can hot glue on the top of your littlest, whichever side you prefer the top to be, it doesn't matter. You're gonna hot glue a twig or a wine cork or a cinnamon stick or some leaves or some whatever else you come up with. You can truly make it your own in this step, which is really, really fun. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I would love to see your finished products. I am on Facebook at Brooklyn Hookers Crochet Club. I'm on Instagram as Brooklyn Handcrafted, and I would absolutely love to see your projects. Tag me in them. And if you have any questions, please reach out. I will put the pattern down below for all 3 sizes. And I will also link to the PDF pattern, which I sell on Etsy or Ravelry. It's a few bucks, and it is printer friendly, very nicely formatted. It's a lot easier to carry around than having to constantly watch a video. So I hope you enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching.